Good afternoon, Reckling family, and welcome back to another exciting session. A brand new program on the schedule today. We have Reading with Brenn. Not entirely sure what we're going to be reading. I suppose that's going to be a bit of a surprise, but before we get into it, we will do an acknowledgement of country.
500 years before Christopher Columbus.
Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the First Nations people as the original inhabitants of this country. We recognise, respect and celebrate the cultural distinctions and traditions of Indigenous people and value their rich and positive contribution to society. We pay our respects to the traditional owners and custodians of the land we work on and acknowledge all elders and warriors past, present and emerging. So thank you. I'm looking forward to this session, brand new, and I'll throw straight over to you, Brendan.
Thank you so much, Sam and Geordie. What a great workout. And I guess it's, just something different to provide. Sort of, was a bit of a, we're in a bit of a naughty boys high school, and year 10 teacher Mark Rivet, he said to us, guys, you're such naughty boys. If I ask you guys to read books like To Kill a Mockingbird and The Homer and all these books, I know you won't read it because you probably can't afford it. So what we're going to do is, for each day, for the whole year, we're going to sit down and read this book together. So I thought, oh, okay, yeah. So we read all the classics, which is really nice. And I guess this is a bit of a tribute to Mark. So this is the book that I thought we could read together. And yeah, like, who knows where this will go, guys. Like, so I'm happy to read a chapter. And then if anyone else has got a book and they'd like to share, we can do that. I mean, I've got a few other books, Geordie, Australian classics, while the Billy Balls, which is a little bit different, The Count of Monte Cristo, but that's quite a technical read. And then definitely I'd love to read this one, but probably going to bore all the people. I mean, have a look at that, Sam. Look at this bloke. He's, that's the old school way, man. Just do, mate. Just do. That's classical. Only in Australia. Oh, gold. But I guess, I thought, go figure. I'm actually a historian by trade. So I studied history and ancient history at La Trobe University in Bundoora. Who would think? And we read this book and, we had to write reports on it. So I think there's a famous movie made of this book. Do you know what the movie was, Sam or Geordie? Troy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
There you go.
So it's got Brad Pitt.
Yep.
And what's that Aussie actor? He's from Tullamarine, actually. I can't think of his name. He's super famous. He was Poiter, and then now he's a super Hollywood actor. He's from Tullamarine, go figure. And he was one of the Hector. He was Hector. So if you look up Troy, Aussie guy Eric Bana.
Oh, Eric Bana. Yeah.
So that's where that Hollywood movie was based on this book. And it's got some pretty amazing values, I guess. In that scene, well, it's actually, when you read this book, it's quite a lovely scene. Hector, I'm kind of giving the book away a little bit, but Hector was killed by Achilles, and Achilles, they're on the beach at Troy, and with all these soldiers and with the king Agamemnon, and they're having a souvlaki, as the Greeks do. Go figure. It's in the book. I promise you, it's in the book. We'll find it. And then Hector's dad comes down. He sort of gets through all the soldiers and gets to Achilles, and he's like, "What are you doing here? You're the enemy." And he's just like, "Well, I want to get my son Hector, and I want to give him proper burial rites." And he's like, "Oh, okay. Well, let's forget. We will talk about that, but let's have a souvlaki, and let's eat first, and be merry, and be happy and respectful," which is really, what a lovely trait to do. And then we'll talk about it. So that's actually in this book, and that happened in the Hollywood movie. So, yeah, what's wrong with being respectful of each other? So they're lovely values, and this was happening thousands of years ago. So anyway, what do you think, Sam? We'll run with it.
Yeah, no, it sounds good. I've never seen the movie or read the book, so I'm quite interested.
So maybe should we skip to the end? That's what I used to do, Geordie. I just skip to the end and read. When you do the report, oh yeah, this has happened, and they're like, "Did you read it, Brenny?" I'm like, Then you go watch the movie. Did anyone do that?
I always watch the movies and looked up the little synopsis online. That's what I did, but I don't encourage that. You got to read.
Yeah, that's right, kiddies. Especially my daughter Ava. Make sure you read the book. But this was our tactic of our Year 10 teacher to actually make us read these classics. So we'll go to, I was almost going to skip to the end where all the action is, because I guess there's a reason why. I've got the full spotlight here. That Achilles on your just where your ankle is, at the back of your ankle, is where this come from. Can you believe that, Sam?
I did think it had something to do with Greek mythology and that sort of stuff. So it's interesting how all that sort of stuff happens.
Yeah, it's actually true. It comes from the Achilles come from this book. So all right, we'll go to the Great Bow. So I think that's a little bit interesting. So we're going to skip a few chapters. 316. Sorry to my Year 10 teacher. I've given you guys a bit of context. Okay, the Great Bow. Oh, so basically what happened was one of the Greek kings, they all come together because they wanted to expand their territories, as a lot of countries do, and they wanted Troy, and they used it as an excuse. One of the king's brother, he had a beautiful wife named Helen, and Helen of Troy, and basically Paris had a bit of an affair with Helen when they were in Athens, and Helen sort of went stored away on a ship back to Troy. So then the kings of Greece, seeing this as a great excuse to invade Troy and get that land and assets and wealth. We've skipped a whole lot of chapters, but that's Brenny style, why not? So the Great Bow. Athenia, goddess of the flashing eyes, now prompted that wise lady Penelope to confront the suitors in the palace with the bow and the great iron axes that were there to test the skill and lead to their destruction. She descended the high staircases from her own apartments, and with her sharply hand-picked up a well-made copper key, which had an ivy handle that made her way with the ladies to a storeroom in a distinct corner of the house where the king's treasure was kept. Here, with the stocks of bronze, of gold, and wrought iron, lay the incurved bow and quiver full of deadly arrows, which had been given to him by his friend. some of these names are quite Greek and difficult to say. This is actually Paris that's talking about this bow, and this is sort of where this is going, guys. That bow is quite essential to the story and what happened to Achilles. So Odysseus had come over to recover a public debt, some Menelaus having lifted 300 sheep from Ithaca, shepherds and all, and carried them off in their galleys. This was a business that brought Odysseus so far afield through a mere lad at the time. His father and other elders had entrusted him with a mission. For his part, had come in search of a dozen mares he had lost. So mares would be probably horses. In the sequel, these horses led to the death in a fatal encounter with Hercules, the lion-hearted child of Zeus, and here are the mighty labourers. So it's actually said, Homer actually said that Achilles was part mortal and son of Zeus. So Zeus was a god, and Hercules was a god, the child of Zeus, and that's where Achilles was actually a son of Zeus too. But it's actually interesting so Achilles' mum deliberately slept with Zeus so she could have a mortal son, which was Achilles. And Achilles, when he was born, she put Achilles in this bath, and in the bath she held Achilles by the Achilles and dipped him in this bath to make him immortal. But she held him. Does that make sense? By the Achilles? Does that make sense, Sophie? So basically, he was part immortal. He wasn't by the Achilles because she held him there when she was dipping him in the bath. So just putting a bit of context into the story, it's pretty funny. We're skipping a few chapters. We should get, who doesn't love a bit of action? For Hercules killed him in his own house through Epiphytus' host, caring no more in the cruel heart of his for the vengeance eye of God than for the hospitality he had given him. It was on the quest for these animals that Epiphytus met Odysseus and gave him the bow, which in years gone by the great, his father, had carried out to his death, bequeathed him in his place. In return, Odysseus gave Epiphytus a sharp sword and a stout spear as an earnest of friendship that he hoped to cherish. But before the two could meet as host and guest, the son of Zeus, geez, there's a lot of blood and guts in this book. I forgot. I'm almost like whether I should skip bits and pieces. This bow Odysseus never took on board with him when he sailed to the wars, but laid it up at his home in memory of a treasured friend, though he did use it on his own estate. The queen reached out the storeroom and mounted the oak threshold, the work of some carpenter of bygone days, whose days had smoothed it well and trued it to the line, and whose hands had fixed the doorpost, two in their socks, and hung the polished doors upon them. She quickly undid the thong attached to the doorknob, passed the key through the hole, and with a well-aimed thrust, shot back the bolt. The key did its work. With a groan like the roar of a bull at a grass in a meadow, the doors flew open before her, and she stepped onto the raised boarding of the floor. Here stood the chest where clothing was laid by scented herbs. But Penelope, raising on tiptoe, fetched the bow down from its peg in the shining case and covered it. And there she sat down with the case on her knees and bursting into the sobs as she drew out her husband's bow. But when the abundance of her tears had brought its own relief, she set out for the hall to face the proud lords who were courting her. She must have been quite an attractive woman. Carrying the bow and the quiver with its deadly lord of arrows in her arms, while the women followed with a box full of iron and bronze implements that her master had employed for gains of skill. Then veiled her cheeks with a fold of her bright headdress, the noble lady took her stand by a pillar of the massive roof and without further ado issued her challenge to the suitors. Oh, okay. Listen, my lords, you are fastened on this house in the long absence of its matter, as the scene of your perpetual feasts, and you could offer no better pretext for your conduct than your wish to win my hand in marriage. That being the prize, come forward now, my gallant lords, for I challenge you to try and skill on the great bow of King Odysseus. And whichever man among you proves the handiest at stringing the bow and shoots the arrows through every one of these 12 axes, with that man, I will bidingly goodbye to this house, which welcomed me as a bride, this lovely house so full of good things and home that even in my dreams I shall never forget. Wow, okay, interesting. Wasn't obviously a love marriage, it was more based on if you could shoot a bow and what was it? Shoot a bow through 12 axes. Love it. How things have changed over the centuries. She then turned to the good swineherd Emmaus and told him to hand over the bow and the iron tools to the suitors. As he took them from her and sat them down, Emmaus gave way to tears, while from the cowman beyond him there also came a sob when he saw the master's bow. The stupid yokels, he claimed, who can't see further than their noises, you miserable pair, what are you standing there for, stupiding and upsetting your mistress as though she loss of her beloved husband weren't troubling enough? Sit down and eat your food in silence, or else clear out of here and cry outside. You can leave the bow where it is to settle this matter between us, and it certainly will, for I don't think that pretty weapon will prove easy to string. There's not a man in the whole company as good as Odysseus was. I saw him myself, and I have a good memory, though I was only a child at the time. In spite of what he said, Odysseus nursed a secret hope that himself might string the bow and shoot it through all the marks, though it's actually, when it come to shooting, he was to be the first to feel an arrow from the hands of peerless Odysseus, who he just been insulting and encouraging all his friends to insult, as he sat in the man's house. But the young prince had a word to say. I'm afraid I must be a born fool, he laughed, exclaimed. My dear mother, wise as she is, says she will leave the house to marry again, and here I am, smiling, chuckling to myself like an idiot. Well, gentlemen all, come forward. Here is your prize, a lady who's like you will not find today in Attica. No, not in sacred. Geez, that's a tough one. Basically, nothing. Not like I think she's one of the best suitors in Greece. Basically, her dad's saying. But you know this well enough. What need for me to sing my mother's praises? So come along. Oh, it's actually her son. No false excuses or delays. Make up your minds to face the thing and let us see you string it. Why shouldn't mind trying myself? And if I string the bow and shoot an arrow through the axes, my mother can say goodbye to this house and go off with another man for all I care, leaving me here satisfied that at last I'm equal to handling my father's forbidden toys. Oh, okay. So putting in context, her dad, this lady we're talking about, her husband died in battle. So now she is basically putting out the battle cry to any suitors. If they want to marry her, they have to do this. And her son's basically saying he's also going to do it, but he wants to prove that he's also a decent man too. The men watching him could not help admiring the neat way in which he set them up, though he had never seen it done before. Then he took his stance on the threshold, addressed himself to the bow. 3 times he made it quiver in his efforts to bend it. But every time he gave the struggle up, though not the hope that he might still succeed in drawing on the string and shooting through the iron mask. And the 4th time he put such pressure on the bow that he might well have strung it yet, if Odysseus had not put an end to his attempts with a shake of the head. Oh well, the young prince sighed. I suppose I shall always be a craven and a weakling. Or perhaps I'm not too young, not too sure, enough yet of my own strength to take on anyone who may care to pick up a quarrel with me. Well, sirs, it is now up to you, who are a stronger man than me, to try the bow and see who comes off best. With this, he put the bow down on the ground, propped the tip against the polished woodwork of the door, with the arrow resting close beside it. Then he resumed his seat. Antonius, in his persuasive way, proposed that they should all take their turn, walking from left to right, the way the wine went round. This was agreed, with the result that the first man to get up was Letus, the son, Leonardo. I'm saying these names really bad, who used to officiate at the sacrifice and always sat up by the great wine barrel in the far corner. Unlike the rest, and they filled him with indignation. Raising now to take the first turn, he picked up the bow and arrow, took his stand on the threshold, and addressed himself to the bow. But long before he could string it, the effort of bending it tired out his delicate, unhardened hands. He turned to the suitors. My friends, he said, I shall never string it, but let the next man try. Believe me, this bow will break the heart and the death of many champion here. And a good thing too. Far better to die than to live on and miss the prize that lures us here every day and keeps us always hoping. There are some of you at this moment who still think they may have the desire and win Queen Penelope's hand. Let them try this bow and see. They'll soon transfer their love and lay their gifts at the feet of some other Arcadian beauty. And so Penelope will be able to marry the man who offers most and her destined mate. Jeez. Pretty full-on contest they're having here. Propping the tip against the polished woodwork of the door with the arrow leaning close beside it, and so it resumed his seat. But Antonius took him to task. What a silly speech. It's an outrage. What I strongly resent is to suggest that this bow will break the hearts and be the death of the best man here. Just because you cannot string it yourself, which is really your mother's fault, and you were never born to be a bowman. However, there are others in this noble company who string it soon enough. Look sharp, he ordered, and make a fire in the hall. Draw up a big stool and fleece it on, and bring a large round tallow from the stores, so that we young men may thaw and grease this bow before we try and settle this match. I wonder what a tallow is. Never heard of that word. Do you know what a tallow is, Sam? Sophie? Never heard of it.
Beef or mutton fat is what Google has just told me.
Sorry?
Rendered beef or mutton fat.
Oh, that's interesting. So they were trying to grease up the bow so it was a bit more supple to use.
Yeah, there you go.
They certainly would have had it back in those times because they were, they had the beef and they had the lamb and they were, they used to cook it up. So yeah, that makes sense. The young men greased the bow with hot tallow and did their best, but they failed to string it all all at the same time. In fact, they were not nearly strong enough. Antonius, however, held off for the first time being, and they were the leaders of the party and by far the best men it could boast. Meanwhile, the two king's men, the cowman and the swineherd, had joined forces and slipped out of the house. Odysseus himself followed him, and when they had passed through the door and the courtyard, he called out, "Cowman, and you there, swineherd," and then proceeded tactfully to sound them. Shall I out with it, or shall I hold my tongue? No, I feel I must speak. If it come to fighting for Odysseus, what line would you men take? Supposing he were to bow in from somewhere suddenly, just like that, would you be on the suitor's side or his? Tell me which way your feelings lie. I wish to God, the cowman said, some power would only bring him home. You soon know my mettle and what I could do with my hands. Emmaus turned in with a prayer to all the gods that there were wise masters might see him home again. Odysseus, thrush assured of the genuine feelings, took the next step. Well, I'm here, he said. Yes, I must. I myself home again in my own country after 19 years of suffering. I realise that you are the two of all my men who will be glad to see me back. So he's talking about his cowmen, that they'll be, because obviously all the other guys are trying to get his wife by shooting the bow, but the cowman and the other guy is actually happy to see him back, which is go figure. I realise that you are the only two of all my men who will be glad to see me back, for I have not heard a single one of the others put up a prayer for my return. So I'm going to tell you too exactly what I'm prepared to do for you in the future. If the powers above let me surpass this gang of bullies, I'll get you each a wife, make you a giant, and build you a house near to mine. And from that day, I shall regard you both as friends and brothers. I've said I am Odysseus. Let me give you a proof positive of that fact, so you may know me for certain and be convinced in your hearts. Look at this scar where I'm struck by a boar's tusk when I went to where I was struck by a boar's tusk. As he spoke, he drew his rags aside and disposed the long scar. The two men looked and examined it carefully. Then they burst into tears, flung their arms around Odysseus' neck and kissed him fondly on the head and shoulders. Odysseus equally moved, kissed their heads and hands, and the tender scene might well have been prolonged till sunset, had Odysseus not decided to bring it to an end. Stop crying, he said, or someone coming from the house may notice us and tell the people indoors. Go on now, one after the other, not in company. I shall go first and you must follow. And here's your cue. The others, I mean that gang of suitors who refuse to let me have the bow and quiver. When that happens, my good Emmaus, bring the bow down the hall and put it in its hands. Also tell the women to lock their tight-fitting doors which leads to their rooms, and say that if they hear... I won't read that bit. Oh dear. When he had given these instructions, Odysseus went back into the palace and sat down once more on the stool. The two royal servants followed him in. By now the bow had come into the hands of Emmaus, who was shifting it about in the firelight to warm it. But he failed to string it for all that, and then the men's proud heart rebelled. Damnation, take that thing, he cried in his rage. I feel this bitterly, not for myself alone, but for all of us. This miscarriage of our wedding plans I certainly regret, but not so very much. There are plenty of women left in our island here and in the other towns. What does grieve me is the thought that our fatigue with his bows proves us such weaklings compared with the godlike Odysseus. This disgrace will stick in our names forever. But Antonius plausible as always, would have none of this. That is quite wrong view to take. You know it yourself. Today is a public holiday in honour of the archer god. Is that time for bending bows? Put the thing down and forget it. And why not leave the axes standing where they are? I'm sure nobody's going to break into a royal palace and steal them. Come, let the wine steward go round and pour a little each in cup. We'll make our offerings and give archery a rest, and tell the gathered men in the morning to bring in the very best goats from all his flocks, so we can sacrifice the great archer Apollo and then try the bow and see who wins. This was very much their likings. So I get the impression that they've had enough. They can't use the bow, so they want the wine cup boy to come and put some wine in their cups, and they want the goat herder to give them their best goat so they can sacrifice it and eat it. So, and then they're going to come back for another day. So what do you reckon, Sam? We might wrap it up. Half an hour reading, that's about my limit for the probably year, actually.
That's good. It's interesting. Like, yeah, like all the books. I'm not a big reader, but as you can see behind me, there's a stack of books. That's because Mum is. But yeah, it's not really that sort of history. I know, like it's not necessarily real or anything like that. But having those history-based novels, is interesting rather than. I think Mum does a lot of crime books.
Well, I mean, I'd be happy to do this one, but it'd probably bore we'd probably get a pretty good crowd, actually.
Yeah, the AFL chat show would definitely be here.
Yeah. But yeah, just something different. Yeah. So yeah, just something nice from my high school. I thought I just wanted to share with everyone.
That was lovely.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, come off mute if you like, Sophie.